Hello and welcome to Word Up, a series of podcasts hosted by Oxford University Press with Helen Prince and guests.
In this podcast, the word perform is going to come up, and we thought it would be quite interesting to have a little look at the etymology behind that word. So this word came around around the 1300s and meant to carry into effect, to fulfill, to discharge or carry out what is demanded or required. And then really interestingly, the theatrical musical sense of the word perform came around in the 1600s. And that meant then to act or represent something on a stage, to sing or render a musical instrument. And what I particularly like about this word is the verb form. So in the verb form of the word in Middle English, it meant to make or to construct, to produce or to bring about, but it also meant your dreams coming true. How lovely is that? So to perform in Middle English meant to make your dreams come true. So that's a really lovely moment for us to remember. That's the story behind that word. Today I'm joined by Shareen Wilkinson, which is an absolute joy. She is an incredible array of awesomeness, including advisor, very experienced primary school teacher, senior leader. She's been the advisor for her LA in Sutton. She's also an author of all sorts of different books by OUP and has been in education for about 20 years. Welcome to our podcast, Shareen.
Oh, thank you so much. Lovely to be chatting to you today.
Yeah, just brilliant. Lovely to see you, although we're just going to be hearing you, aren't we, on our podcast. Let's get to know you a bit and tell us, why did you choose teaching?
Okay, so originally I was really enthusiastic about English. So from very little, probably age 5, I'd write poems and read them in assembly. So it's something that I've always been passionate about. And then I did my A-level English, and I did just a straight degree in English literature, so not even teaching. Yeah. And then I did my PGCE in primary. And I think it was when I was doing my degree and we did a unit on children's literature for the whole year. I got really excited. Back then, it was Harry Potter that had just been released about 20 years ago. And I thought, actually, yeah, this is something that I'd like to do. So it was only until I did my degree that I wanted to become a teacher.
Awesome. So those little poems you wrote when you were 5, have you still got a few of those?
Yeah, I have. So I would practice them. And then I always remember a poem I wrote in year 1. And I read it to the whole assembly because I was one of those children that just liked English and drama, especially. So winter has gone, the sun has come out, flowers have opened, that is no doubt. So it's like, I just...
you still remember it by heart. That's fantastic. Do you know, just shows you how vital those early memories are. You know, that's a really formative experience for you, and you still remember that poem.
Yes, I do. I won't read it all because it's quite cringy, but I just remember just reading poetry and just being really sort of engaged with it all from a very young age. So that's why I'm passionate about it, particularly for children who don't get that opportunity. And that's why I kind of work in that sort of field.
Yeah, fascinating. And poetry, boy, is that a huge benefit to us in everything that we want to do.
Absolutely. My mum loves writing poetry. She's always writing poems and then sharing them. If there's an event, she would sort of write a poem for it. If there's a funeral, she would write a poem. For lockdown, she's written a poem.
Really?
That's kind of how I grew up. Yeah.
That's in your genes.
Yeah, she loves English as well. So that's kind of where I've got it from too.
Fascinating. Thank you. That's really brilliant. So you're telling us there about your passions, which is really inspiring. Thank you. What about your best lesson? So I know that you do lots of observations. So it might be one you've seen, or it might be one you've taught yourself. But what's your best lesson?
Yeah, so I have a hands-on approach. So whenever I work in schools, I always do what I call just really simple co-teaching, co-planning, and working alongside the teacher, sometimes teaching the class. But the best way I find is to do the lesson together, or to model the first part of the lesson and then work together. So I have to say, I worked in a school in London, in Brixton, year 6 class. They were quite sort of struggling with their reading, and I did a session on vocabulary and pop songs with them. and basically songs that they knew. And it was interesting because the children looked at me as if to say, who is this teacher coming in and teaching us these songs?
They might have thought that you were a famous pop star.
That are cool. And, who is this person? So I showed them some songs, different ones, ones that I knew they'd be really, really familiar with.
What were your songs?
We looked.
Can you remember?
Probably know this. Yes, I do. You probably know this already, Helen, but we used a little bit of Stormzy. I know his lyrics aren't always the best, but we use the clean bits of Stormzy.
I use that with Year 11. I think Stormzy's his lyrics are so passionate and there's so much depth to them. I think they're great. Yeah, I've used that in GCSE teaching.
Look, I just had to use it. I've used with children Adele. I've used I've used all sorts, just things that they're engaged with. But we used that and that worked really well. And then we did that whole metacognition. How do you know? What word do you think this is, etc. So I think that was one of my best lessons and they got really good reading results.
Well, you're a girl after my own heart there, Shareen. You've talked about music and drama and poetry. So I think we should set up a school together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Plus, how cool are you with Stormzy and Adele in your back pocket? Very good.
We played him at our wedding. We played him. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Like him.
Yeah, I'm with you. All right. So that leads me on to another question about how we explicitly teach vocabulary. So we've mentioned a bit about drama and music, but can you tell us about, what does it look like to really explicitly teach vocabulary for our young people and try and bridge this word gap that we're all hearing about?
Yeah, so you've got kind of like this, if you like, this sort of combination of things. So I think I should just go back a step. So within the wider picture of teaching vocabulary, you've got implicit vocabulary. So things like reading a whole class story to the children and then picking up that within their reading. You've got things like reading for pleasure and, working with children, picking up vocabulary as they're going along. So we kind of call that implicit, if you like.
Yeah.
And we've got that kind of vocabulary for reading, so children using that, which I can talk about a little bit later. We've got vocabulary for writing. So if you're sort of writing much more formally, you might use a certain type of vocabulary. If you're very informally, you might use things like contractions or idioms or things like that. So you've got that kind of vocabulary. You've also got vocabulary for spoken language, things like discourse markers, So, those kinds of things. But explicit teaching is just something that we might not have been doing over the years. So, lots of schools might have had, for example, the word of the week, for example, so the children are understanding a word. But explicit teaching is actually taking a word and unpicking it, its different meanings, its connotations. So put simply, you might pre-teach, for example, vocabulary when you're reading a book, but you might also look at synonyms to do with that word. You might look at antonyms to do with that word. You might draw the word, act out the word, write it in different ways. And also what I found to be quite successful is things like looking at the etymology of the word. And I know lots of people have talked about this. What's the root? Does it have a Greek root? Does it have a Latin root? And it helps children to kind of understand the meanings of words.
Yeah, it's like the story, isn't it? The story of a word. We're always interested in that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just think it's something that we've kind of always taken a word and we've kind of looked at the definition of the word. But this time we're kind of really unpicking the word and really understanding it and then applying it into our writing, applying it into our reading, applying it across the curriculum. So I just think there's always been that kind of gap, if you like, in terms of being explicit about the teaching.
Yeah. And I think that's right, Shareen. I think don't you think it's like what some of the most fun we can have in the classroom is unpicking vocabulary and specific words, because you get to hear what makes kids tick. If you're looking at a word like spontaneous and you unpack it and you get to see what the layers of meaning are that build up in kids' heads, where does it come from? What does it sound like? What are the synonyms that we know for that word? And it's like we were saying, it's about the story, isn't it? The story behind. And actually, when you unpack individual words, you really get to hear that story of what's going on in their heads.
Yeah, I find it really useful. Obviously, I'm from a generation where we didn't really do any of this. And actually, I find it really useful. One of the things that we did do, though, I did a lot of this with my mother. So my mum would unpick words, tell me words, what they meant, etc. And I think that's why I'm so passionate about that, because I was lucky enough to have that from home. But some children aren't as lucky to have that from home. And so I just want all children to have that access, if you like, to vocabulary.
Yeah. And that's one of the things we need to be really mindful of, isn't it? Is giving our families as much as we can to help that, what you've just been describing, that talk environment at home. It's one of the things the latest Word Gap report picks up on, is really supporting parents and families with talk in the home. Reading, obviously crucial, but, all of those talk activities as well, stuff to talk about over supper and all of that. Do you think that the way that we teach vocabulary changes significantly through primary from, EYFS through to Key Stage 2? And what does it look like?
I think it changes immensely. And I think that's what's important when we're looking at quite a bit of the research. And that's what I've kind of been trying to unpick for schools. Quite a lot of it is for older children. And I watched a really good webinar the other day, and I can't remember who was presenting on it. But one of the things they said was that make sure your strategies are age appropriate. So when children are very young, it's important to act out the word, for them to hear it, for them to listen to songs. And actually, explicit teaching of vocabulary, finding antonyms, synonyms, are not appropriate for that age group, particularly very young children. I'm thinking of nursery children, EYFS children, etc. But as they move into Key Stage 1, we can explore the word, we can act it out, we can do some drama around it. And for very kind of able pupils, we might start in Year 2 looking at some of the etymology of the word. But as we reach into Key Stage 2, that's when we're really looking at etymology. What does it mean? What's the word origin, if you like? Does it have a Greek root, a Latin root, a French root? And it helps children to really understand the meanings of words. So I think we just need to be mindful sometimes when we're looking at things of the age group and what's age appropriate in terms of teaching vocabulary. And the best way for young children to kind of take on new vocabulary is for them to be reading.
Yeah, absolutely. Because then it's about the story, and it's the story that's so engaging. Do you know, I was doing some work for a school the other day, and we were looking at the etymology and how we can link that to story. And we were looking at hippopotamus.
Oh, lovely.
And I didn't know this, but it's from Latin and Greek, as all these things are. But hippo meaning horse and potamus meaning of water. So it's a horse of the water. And then you just think, well, that's so beautiful to get that additional layer of meaning to the word hippopotamus. It really does give you that story.
We had a word like that because we do family quiz every week via Zoom.
Oh, well done. You're still going. I think most of us have given up. Good for you. You're going to win the prize for that one.
My husband and I won. And we had a word like that. And it says hippo. And actually, because he learned Latin at school, and he said that's to do with horses. And it's interesting because actually knowing the backgrounds of words, he says, really has helped him with spelling and understanding. Yeah. So years later, way past when he learned Latin at school, he's still finding that really useful for understanding of words. So we won the quiz anyway.
Excellent. Good for you. Well done.
That is a bit of etymology help there.
It really does. Because you
get... people answered hippo because they thought it was a hippopotamus, but actually the hippo meant horse.
Meaning horse. Yeah. Fascinating. Well, it explains a lot of our crazy spelling as well, doesn't it?
Yes, it does, absolutely.
So I alluded to the Word Gap report earlier, and one of the key findings from that 2020 Bridging the Word Gap at Transition report is that academic vocabulary in particular is an area of need for our young people, particularly looking between what does it look like to move from Year 6 to Year 7, going up to the top end of Key Stage 2. But what words in particular do you think children need to learn? Is it possible to find a list?
Okay, so I've got kind of lists of words, so different things that I use, and it depends again, and I think we talked about this before, the age of the children. Because obviously, if we look at the academic word list, it's a bit too tricky for example, reception children and Key Stage 1 children. It's okay as you move up into Key Stage 2, but they kind of need to learn some other words. So I've kind of got 3 views on the words that children need to use, and apologies for having 3 views. So you've got Isabel Beck and colleagues, and lots of people are really familiar with the tiers of vocabulary. So at tier 1, as most people know, that's your everyday language. It's well known, but people listening, people have got different, they might not be aware. So things like the Nelly is quite good for that everyday language, because sometimes some children do actually just need the everyday language. They're not even ready to move on to tier 2.
Yeah.
Then tier 2 is your written language, or your kind of academic language, if you like. And then tier 3 is your subject-specific words, particularly if you're looking at science, history, etc. Beck recommends, in terms of that explicit teaching of vocabulary, that we look at tier 2 words. And then we've got this academic word list that we could use. So when I worked on the Oxford Word Start activity, we looked at the Oxford corpus. This corpus, if you like, was kind of encapsulated a group of words that children at that age group, so we were looking at Key Stage 1 in particular, use. So more able writers were using this vocabulary. And we took the words from there. And so that was more age appropriate, using the research in terms of supporting children for the younger age groups to kind of use the vocabulary of more able writers. So that was something that we used in terms of words, and they were much more appropriate for that age group. Another thing that I've recommended to schools, still tier 2 vocabulary. Of course, sometimes we might need to focus in on tier 1 vocabulary, but it's making these links between vocabulary and spelling.
Yeah.
Because there's so much to do in the primary curriculum. It's a bit different to secondary because we're teaching everything. I mean, I was lucky enough to escape music in all of the schools that I taught in, although I like music.
What would Stormzy say? Stormzy won't be impressed with that, Shareen.
No, I like music and I listen to it all the time. And I did do piano and violin as a child, but teaching music is a different thing. And so I managed to escape teaching music throughout the whole time I was a classroom teacher. And I also managed to escape teaching a foreign language. Even though I did GCSE French, we always had a French teacher or Spanish teacher come in to do the teaching.
I can see that suddenly having to teach French is quite a tricky one.
Yeah, I mean, I got my GCSE, but that was it, And so I just think in primary, we have to teach everything. We've got geography, history, topics, science,
Absolutely.
English and maths. We've also got this crammed day where we're trying to fit in everything. And so for a lot of schools that I work in, I've recommended that they sort of look at the tier 3 words, look at the tier 2 words within their curriculum and use those to teach, but also use the words that they might be using for pre-teaching. So before they read a book, looking at those words and unpicking those explicitly before they read them in the text.
Yeah.
So it's a combination, if you like, but just making it age appropriate for primary children.
Yeah, fascinating. Thank you. I know, there are all sorts of websites out there to support us, but you can find, key lists for vocabulary for teaching books, and then that helps you pre-teach, you're right, so that you've got, an idea before you even open the book.
Yes, so you don't want to unpick all of the words because obviously they need to be able to read them. But some of the more trickier words you might unpick, and some of those will be tier 2 and some of those will be tier 3.
Yeah.
So just kind of unpicking those and knowing your class as well. Sometimes someone else somewhere far has put together a list, but actually your class do know those words. And so knowing which words you want to tackle with your class will be really important.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, let's think about the link between vocabulary and reading. And I sort of want to think about that in terms of not just the text, which we know is vital, but the story behind the text. I know certainly as a mum, in fact, I've got none left at primary school now. It's very sad. My youngest has just gone into year 7. But certainly in the primary days, the days when they came home and said, a spaceship landed on the top field. That's the catalyst for the piece of work they're doing about, rockets or a science topic or whatever it was. And The primary school my kids went to were brilliant at doing narrative-based teaching and bringing it to life through little real events and dramas that would take place on the playground. And do you think that that's important to engage and focus and build vocabulary for our kids?
Absolutely. I mean, as I said before, I absolutely love the drama in the classroom, acting out the characters, really getting into it. And I think that helps children with vocabulary, but also to visualize the vocabulary and to make inferences in terms of their reading. You know, I've been into schools where they've got the fire brigade come in because they're doing the Great Fire of London, and then they're going to read about it and the children experience it firsthand.
Awesome.
And that helps children who don't have that background.
Yeah.
So they might not necessarily have that experience at home, but they're getting that when they come to school. And one of the things I say is that sometimes, yes, the children might not have that experience at home, etc., but when they're in your school and they're being supported by you, then you're going to help them and enrich them with a range of experiences. So drama, activities, going on trips when we can, or even just watching it. The thing with vocabulary is it kind of fits in nicely with reading because you've got to understand the words in order for you to read and comprehend. But I think sometimes we focus so much on vocabulary, but we have to be mindful in terms of reading that it's just one aspect of teaching and reading. So we've got things like background knowledge. If we look at the Scarborough model from 2001, we've got the language structure that children need to know. They need to make inferences and they need to have knowledge of the text. So vocabulary fits in within that wider bit of reading. I think why vocabulary is so important now is it's the aspect that we kind of forgot a little bit. So we're trying to teach children reading, but we kind of forgot about the vocabulary bit and the drama and all of that and the speaking and listening. And so I think it just supports us with kind of focusing, if you like, back on vocabulary and making that explicit for children. And so I just think if children are able to read the words and to understand them, that really supports their reading comprehension.
Yeah, because of course where that leads, that forgotten bit of vocabulary, which I think you're right. I mean, I've been teaching 20 something years, and really, we weren't focused on vocabulary explicitly. I think obviously it's implicit, and that's why we love teaching English in particular, because, you get to unpick, like we were saying, what makes our pupils tick, these gorgeous kids sitting in front of us, and we get to know a little about them because we're talking about vocabulary. Yeah, it was all about reading and writing. Certainly for the first 15 years of my career, it was all about reading and writing. And then suddenly there's this void and you think, well, how is it that my year 11 doesn't really know what it means to feel surprised, doesn't have another word for cold, doesn't know how to articulate feeling scared? And suddenly there's this chasm opening in front of us. And I remember that moment maybe 6-7 years ago when I thought, oh my goodness, there's a void here that perhaps previously, was filled with a more readerly atmosphere. But, the way our kids live now is very different to what happened 20 years ago, isn't it? And
absolutely.
I don't blame technology in any way because I think it's a hugely beneficial tool to almost everything that we do in life. But there is a payoff, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly my experience. We focused in on the reading and writing, and actually the vocabulary wasn't as explicitly taught. And so that's something that more recently schools have been really working on.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely, Helen. It's just a bit that might have been forgotten. And I think sometimes that's it. It's just a new focus on the same thing, but just making sure we don't forget the other bits.
Yeah, absolutely. And it definitely bears repeating, because without that, the writing doesn't happen. There's nothing to come down your arm and into your pen if you don't have the words. Seamus Heaney, isn't it? Said if you can say it, you can write it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always say, and I can't remember where I got it from, and I apologise if somebody listening it's theirs, and I'll acknowledge it later. But I will always say, think it, say it, hear it, like it, write it.
Oh, that's nice. Say that again.
Yeah, so think it, say it orally.
Yeah.
Hear it, because you've got to hear to see if it makes sense.
Yeah.
Do you like what you've, articulated in your mind? Then write it.
Nice.
So I quite like that with children, particularly young children, just for them to think about that process
Yeah. And that's oral rehearsal, isn't it? Right there. Practicing in an oral way what we're going to write.
Yes.
It's a bit like the look, say, cover, write, check, isn't it, for spelling?
It's the oral rehearsal before that commitment to print. I think it's so important to have that talk. And I know you're really passionate about oracy as well, Helen, but just to have that talk before the writing and to have that vocabulary and that experience before the children are writing. So crucial, absolutely essential. They can't write if they haven't got any ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. I can see that on a classroom wall appearing as we speak. Yeah, it's great.
Absolutely. Loads of people have got it as a poster. And I always say, whenever you make a poster, particularly with young children, you put their faces on it. So they have ownership of it. So think it, say it, hear it, like it, write it, and then pictures of them on it, because that's what they've come up with. That's their thing and that's what they use. So that, personalize it if you are going to use it.
Absolutely right. Yeah. Because then you've got buy-in, haven't you? They feel that it's for them. Let's finish up with a few quick fire Shareen Wilkinson questions. Okay. We ready?
Yes.
For what you would say are your favorite things. Okay. It's not going to be about food. Don't worry. Okay. What's your favorite poem?
I'm quite nerdy, actually. Lots of people don't know this, so I can be cool and nerdy at the same time. But I really liked Wilfred Owen's poems, his war poems. I actually found those really interesting as a child, reading those. And I quite like reading those war poems. And that's kind of like my sort of nerdy side, if you like. Okay,
so you're a dulce et decorum. There we go. We're back to Latin.
Yes, I do. I really loved reading that and really unpicking it and going through. So I do like modern poetry as well, but I also like older poetry too. So I really like that poem. There you go. That's my nerdy side.
Lovely. No,
that's be cool. I like Stormzy lyrics too, which, is a bit. But I did do a degree in English literature, so I do like those.
And aren't lyrics a great way to engage our less interested kids?
Yes.
But obviously not always. But yeah, the minute you say it's a lesson about lyrics, they're in it. But if you say it's a poem, then maybe not so much. But yeah, lyrics definitely engaging.
And especially if the lyrics include poetry and include things like idioms, then you can really explore the kind of nuances of language when you're doing that. It has the same effect as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And idiom has this nasty habit of appearing in Key Stage 2 SATs, I've noticed.
Yeah, they come up all the time. So you've either got a question around it or you've got a reading text where the children have to understand it. But it does. I mean, I know because I do a lot of training with upper Key Stage 2 as well as Key Stage 1. And lots of teachers say, they find idioms. They've been told not to speak in idioms because of children with special educational needs, etc. However, at the end of Key Stage 2, quite a lot of papers, particularly the higher paper at the other end, has idioms within it and the sort of complexity of language. So it's important that we teach it at some point as the children get older.
Because unless you know a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, and what that means, you've got no hope of working that out.
No, you haven't. And it's important for children to actually learn those. And quite a lot of, so for Adele, for example, the pop star Adele, she uses idioms quite frequently throughout most of her songs.
Oh, top advice, Shareen. That's great. The only tricky thing is you can't burst into song.
No.
Which for me is quite hard. It's like sitting on my hands, don't sing. I'm like Miranda, don't sing.
No, but there's always a child that can sing in the class. Just get them to do it. I love it. I love hearing their little voices. It's so wonderful.
Awesome. Okay, so that was your best poem. What's your favourite game?
So we've been playing Trivial Pursuit.
Yay! Lockdown win.
Yeah, we've been really enjoying that actually, and just sort of, it's really made me think of, particularly if we're thinking about vocabulary, that kind of retrieval and sort of all that bit about memory, because you're kind of like, you're digging into your brain. I remember this from school or from college or university. I remember it, but I just can't.
And you can literally feel yourself trying to drag it up from the depths, can't you? Yeah, definitely. Yeah. But games have such a benefit, don't they, of boosting vocab because of the whole talk around what you're doing and
just understanding the words, understanding the question. And actually it just makes it fun as well. You're kind of learning, but also engagement as well.
Yeah. Okay. Last one. What's your favourite word?
My favourite word, I actually said it earlier, Helen.
Now, did I spot it? Not Stormzy.
See if we can retrieve that word. My favourite word is spontaneous. I love it. As a child, so it was something that my mum taught me when I was about, I think, 8. And she said, you could use this word spontaneous, Shareen, in your writing. I thought, I've learned this new word. It's kind of like the earlier version of explicit teaching of vocabulary. And so everything I wrote from then, even my GCSE would have spontaneously or spontaneous in it, because that would be my word. And so it's interesting then that vocabulary, even back then, was so important. The other word, which I think people use it now quite a bit, is unprecedented. Once I'd learned that word...
We're using that one a lot right now.
Yeah. Once I'd learned that word, and that was sort of 20 years ago for my degree, I would always try and include it in some opening. So I think learning words is just, really supports you with your writing, your reading and your understanding. And
I think you're right. I think we do have words that become ours, don't we?
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. And that again reminds me of something Zara Bay, who's the founder of No More Exclusion, says in that latest Word Gap report. She says that young people have to see something of themselves in the language that we're teaching.
I think that's really relevant, and
really kind powerful.
It makes it relevant for them. And also, if we're teaching vocabulary explicitly, then children have got that ownership of the word.
Yeah.
And so they're more likely to apply it into their writing because they understand it very well.
And it's empowering. Shareen, that was an absolute joy to talk to you this morning. Thank you so much for being part of the podcast and sharing all your thoughts and memories and poems. And I loved listening to your little poem at the beginning about you when you were 5. I think that's wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Helen. Really good to have a good chat with you.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this Word Up podcast from Oxford Education. To receive bonus material relevant to the discussion, please visit www.oup.com/education.